The blockade was total. That was the word the Imperial command used in every internal document and every public declaration and every transmission sent to the Compact's observation bodies. Total, complete, absolute. The Veth-Korum Empire had mapped every human colonial installation in the Reach, had cross-referenced the maps against the Compact's population registry, had deployed 312 warships in a configuration that covered every registered transit corridor, and had issued a declaration stating that no vessel, no material, no communication of any kind would pass through the blockade envelope without Imperial authorization. They were correct about the registered colonies. All 14 of them were under blockade. All 14 transit corridors were sealed. The food supply lines that ran from the outer agricultural systems to the population centers were cut. The medical supply chains were interrupted. The communication relays that connected the colonies to each other and to Earth were jammed. The blockade was, by every measurable standard the Empire applied to its own military operations, exactly what they said it was. Total. The Empire had expected the colonies to begin negotiating within 60 days. 60 days was the number their logistics analysts had calculated based on the registered population sizes, the known food stores, the documented medical supply levels. 60 days was the point at which the pressure would become intolerable, and the human government would have to come to the table on Imperial terms. They waited 60 days. No one came to the tables. They waited 90s. Nothing. On day 107, Fleet Commander Sorathvel transmitted an urgent assessment to Imperial Command. The assessment said, "The population centers under blockade are not showing the resource depletion indicators we projected. We are detecting normal energy consumption levels, normal communications traffic within the blocked envelope, and no increase in distress transmissions. The projected pressure is not materializing." Imperial Command reviewed the assessment. They concluded that the sensors were malfunctioning. They sent new sensors. The new sensors said the same thing. What the Empire did not know and what this record exists to explain is what they had missed, not in the mapping. The mapping was accurate. All 14 registered colonies were exactly where the registry said they were. The blockade covered all 14. The Empire had done the work they came to do with the precision they were known for. What they had missed was the question they had not thought to ask. The question was, why 14? Humanity had been a spacefaring civilization for 240 years. In 240 years, with the particular human orientation toward exploration and building, and the specific inability to look at empty space and not wonder what was in it, the registered colonial installation count was 14. 14 in 240 years. The Kethsoreth in 240 years of spacefaring had established 61. The Varun had established 44. The Praetori, who were not known for their enthusiasm for colonization, had established 23. 14 was a small number. The Empire's analysts had noted the small number. They had attributed it to human political caution, to resource constraints, to the particular complexity of human colonial governance that made new installations slow to establish and expensive to maintain. None of those analysts had spent significant time with humans. If they had, one of them might have thought to ask a person who had. If they had asked, they would have heard something that the Compact's diplomatic corps had understood for decades without ever finding it necessary to write down formally, because it was the kind of thing that was obvious once you knew humans and invisible until you did. The humans register what they intend to register. They are, as a civilization, constitutionally capable of keeping a secret. Not through deception, they do not lie well and they do not especially try to. Through the much simpler mechanism of not volunteering information that was not asked for. The Compact's registration system required civilizations to register colonial installations above a certain population threshold. The humans had registered all 14 installations above that threshold. They had done so completely and accurately and on time. Below the threshold, registration was voluntary. The humans had not volunteered. The installations below the threshold were not small. Threshold was a relative term, and the Compact's registration threshold had been written by committee 300 years prior, and had not been significantly revised since and did not account for the specific human approach to community building, which tended to produce functional, self-sufficient settlements at population levels that other civilizations would have classified as outposts rather than colonies. The humans classified them as home. There were 63 of them. 63 settlements, scattered across a volume of space that extended well beyond the registered colonial footprint, established over 240 years by people who had looked at a place and decided to stay, built with the practical thoroughness of people who intended to be there for a long time, and registered with no one because no one had asked, and the humans had not felt the need to announce themselves. The smallest had a population of 400, the largest had 11,000. They were on moons and in asteroid installations and on marginally habitable worlds that the compact survey teams had classified as not worth the effort and that the humans had looked at and seen differently. They were in places that appeared in no Imperial strategic map because they appeared in no compact registry because they had been built by people who were not building for an audience. They had been building for themselves. When the blockade sealed the registered colonies, the 63 unregistered settlements were outside it. Not because they had been hidden, they had not been hidden. Anyone with a thorough enough sensor sweep would have found them, and eventually the Empire did find some of them, the ones that were least remote and those they added to the blockade. But they found them slowly, one at a time, and each one they found was not the one that mattered because the one that mattered was always somewhere they had not yet looked. The food that sustained the registered colonies during the blockade did not come from nowhere. It came from settlements that grew it, and from people who moved it through transit corridors that the Empire had not sealed because the Empire had not known to look for them. The medical supplies that kept the population centers functional came from stockpiles in places the Imperial maps were blank. The communication that held the human communities together under the blockade ran through relay points that were not in any registry, and that the jamming infrastructure had not been positioned to interrupt. The network existed because the people in it had built relationships over 240 years, with the particular human characteristic of treating whoever was nearby as someone worth knowing. The 11,000 in the largest unregistered settlement knew the 400 in the smallest not because of any strategic plan, but because at some point someone had made a journey and met someone and come back with news, and over time the news had become regular and the regularity had become trust, and the trust had become the kind of thing you could ask for help and expect to receive. Not a supply chain, a community. Communities are harder to blockade than supply chains because supply chains have endpoints and communities do not. A supply chain is a line between 2 points, and if you seal both points you have sealed the supply chain. A community is a web with no center and no endpoint and every node connected to every other node by relationships that predate the blockade, and that a military operation has no mechanism for severing because relationships are not infrastructure. You cannot destroy a relationship with a warship. You cannot jam a frequency that runs between people who know each other. The Empire's analysts, when they began to understand what they were dealing with, revised their projections repeatedly. Every revision extended the timeline. Every extension of the timeline required more resources to maintain the blockade. The blockade was expensive in the way that all military operations are expensive, compounded by the particular expense of maintaining it against a target that kept not breaking the way it was supposed to break. On day 230, Fleet Commander Sorethvel transmitted another assessment. This one was longer. It said, "We have now identified 21 unregistered settlements within what we believe to be the human reach. We have extended the blockade to cover 17 of them. The remaining 4 are at distances that make coverage impractical with current fleet disposition. We assess that there are additional unregistered settlements we have not yet located." The human population under effective blockade is significantly smaller than the initial registry suggested. He wrote toward the end of the assessment, a line that Imperial Command initially considered removing from the formal record before deciding that accuracy was more useful than appearance. He wrote, "The humans built more than we were looking for." That was the honest summary. The Empire had looked for what the registry told them was there. The humans had built what they needed, registered what was required, and quietly continued building in the places where no one was keeping count. Not as a strategy, not as preparation for a blockade they had not anticipated. Because that is what they do. They find a place and they make it livable and they make it theirs and they build the relationships that make it sustainable and they go back to work. And in 240 years of doing that, they had made so many things livable and theirs and connected to each other that the full shape of what they had built was not visible from the outside. It was only visible from the inside. From the inside it looked like a family on a marginal moon growing grain that got loaded onto a transport every 3 months and sent to a cousin settlement 2 systems over. a medical researcher in an asteroid installation who had trained half a dozen people in the settlements around her so that they could handle the conditions they were most likely to face. A communication technician who had spent 15 years building relay points because the official infrastructure was sparse, and people needed to be able to talk to each other, and someone had to do it. It looked like the accumulated work of people who were not building an empire, who were building a life. The distinction is significant. Empires are designed from the top down with efficiency and strategic coherence, and the knowledge that someone is watching and assessing whether the result justifies the expenditure. Lives are built from the bottom up with the immediate materials available, and the people nearby and the particular problems in front of you, and no one is watching and no efficiency metric applies, and the result does not have to justify anything except the need of the people who need it. The empire could map colonies. It could not map the accumulated decisions of 240 years of people solving problems for each other. The blockade held for 301 days. It did not break because of a military operation. It did not break because of a diplomatic resolution. It broke because the economics of maintaining 312 warships in a configuration that was covering less and less of its intended target, at a cost that was real and compounding, against a population that was showing no sign of the pressure that justified the cost, became indefensible in the Imperial Council's quarterly review. The quarterly review asked Fleet Commander Sorathvel to present the blockade's current effectiveness assessment. He presented it. The council was quiet for a long time. Then the council chair said, "We sealed 14 colonies." Sorathvel said, "Yes." The chair said, "We are currently covering 21 additional installations, not in the original assessment." Sorathvel said, "Yes." The chair said, "And you believe there are more we have not found?" Sorathvel said, "Yes." The chair said, "How many more?" Sorathvel said, "We do not have a reliable estimate. Our methodology for identifying unregistered installations has improved significantly over the past 300 days. Each time we improve the methodology, we find more than the previous improved methodology suggested." He said, "There may not be a number we can determine from the outside." The chair said, "Explain." He said, "The installations we have found are not hidden. They are simply not prominent. They are places people live. Many of them have been in place for decades. The reason we did not know about them before the blockade is the same reason we are having difficulty mapping them now. They were built for the people in them, not for anyone keeping track." He said, "The human reach is larger than the registry reflects. We do not know by how much. Our current assessment is that it is significantly larger." He said, "The blockade is covering the visible edge of a thing whose interior we cannot see." The council chair looked at the map on the display behind Sorathvel. 14 registered colonies highlighted, 21 additional installations marked. The rest of the space the map showed was blank. The chair said, "What is in the blank space?" Sorathvel said, "We do not know. That is the answer I have been working toward for 300 days. The blockade was lifted 17 days later. Not officially terminated, the Imperial Declaration described it as a strategic repositioning, which is the language organizations use when they need the record to reflect something other than what happened. What happened was the council looked at the blank space on the map and understood that they had spent 300 days and 312 warships blockading the parts of a civilization they could see and had not touched the parts they could not. The parts they could not see had sustained the parts they could see for 301 days without breaking. The council was not interested in finding out how much longer that could continue. The strategic repositioning was announced on a morning that was unremarkable in every respect, except that it was the morning the ships went home. In the unregistered settlements, in the grain fields and the medical bays, and the relay stations and the workshops and the community halls of 63 places that did not appear in any Imperial strategic map, people noted the departure and went back to work. The grain still needed harvesting. The relays still needed maintaining. The Cousins 2 systems over still needed the transport to run on schedule. The work that had sustained everything for 301 days was the same work that had existed before the blockade and would exist after it, because the work was not a response to the blockade. The blockade had been a response to them. They were still here. They had always been here. The Empire had been looking for colonies. What they had found in the blank spaces of their maps was something they did not have a strategic category for. Home, 240 years of it. Unmappable from the outside. Exactly as strong as it needed to be.